Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone around the world who are spending. I'm not sure whether, could you hear me? Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to some of you all around the world. Thank you for joining this session. With everything that's going on around the world, especially in India today, and even in other parts of the world, there has obviously been a lot of information about the vaccine that has been going back and forth. A lot of it is politically motivated. A lot of that is not necessarily true. So why not have the four esteemed doctors that we have over here on the panel today actually explain and clear out some of the misconceptions that have been created related to the vaccines. We have a set of questions that I would be asking throughout this session. And then if you have any other questions, please feel free to put it on the chat, and we will ask those questions towards the end. Right now, we'll go and start introducing the doctors one by one. We'll start in alphabetical order with Anasuya, followed by Ragini, Priya, and Tushar.
Thank you, Sushil. Thank you to IAGB and all of you for giving us this opportunity. So thankful to be here. So I am Anasuya Gunturi. I am a medical oncologist and hematologist at Lowell General Hospital. And I did my training. I started my education in Texas, did my PhD and then my MD there, and then came to the Boston area to do my residency in internal medicine at Beth Israel Deaconess in Longwood. I stayed there for my fellowship, and now I practice at Lowell General. I'm the Associate Medical Director of the Cancer Center there, and recently became the Medical Director of the Palliative Care Program at the hospital as well. And as many of you and many of my colleagues, I've been professionally and personally affected by this pandemic. At work, it's been obviously a very challenging year for all of us, taking care of our patients through all of this, keeping ourselves, our families, our colleagues, and of course, our patients safe from this disease. And then on a personal note, also have had several of my immediate and, other family members affected. Thankfully, many of them, recovered well, but, certainly lost some tragically to this disease. So we're really glad to have this opportunity to talk to all of you. So look forward to a good, lively discussion. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Ragini Jiwa. I am an infectious disease and addiction medicine provider at Boston Medical Center, and I'm a clinical instructor at the Boston University School of Medicine. I've done all of my training through Boston University and Boston Medical Center, and currently am an HIV provider. I had the pleasure of being a frontline provider throughout COVID since its inception, and really have learned a lot about not only being a physician caring for COVID patients, but also helping to do some research and really providing a lot of community guidance through IAGB and throughout our Indian community for the last year and a half. My research right now is in how to prevent infectious complications of injection drug use. And I really look forward to the discussion that we're going to be having today, and hope that you will utilize the chat function throughout to put whatever questions that come up. We'll try to address as many of them. And if any come up later on, we can certainly try to advise y'all later on. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Priya Janardana. I'm an assistant professor of ophthalmology at UMass Medical Center in Worcester, Massachusetts. I'm also the director of the uveitis center over there. So similar to Ragini, I did most of my training at Boston University, Boston Medical Center, very special place in my heart. And I did a one-year fellowship at UCSF in San Francisco in uveitis, ocular immunology, and medical cornea. Then I came back to the East Coast, and now, as I said, I'm faculty at UMass Medical School, and I've been there for 5 years. So, thank you so much, Sushil and IAGB, the whole team for, inviting me to speak. And it's really an honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. And, it's been I think, a long 1.5 years for everybody, and we've all learned a lot over the past year. I've had also a lot of friends, distant family members and patients affected by this, and it's affected everyone. So we're looking forward to the discussion today, and thank you.
Hi, I'm Tariq Patel. I'm a primary care physician, and I'm president of a Riverside Medical Group. It's a large internal medicine practice that we have in Lowell area. I am also a board of directors at Lowell General Hospital. I did my training at Montefiore Medical Center, Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York. And since the training, I've been practicing as a primary care physician here in Lowell. So really looking forward to this. Sushil, thank you for arranging this and giving us the opportunity to answer a lot of people's much needed questions regarding COVID vaccine. Thank you.
Thank you, doctors. This was a great introduction. I just wanted to say that I feel privileged to be part of this team. And just as a moderator, I still feel, it gives me a little ego boost to be with some incredible doctors right here who are giving us information about the, this vaccine. I am on the board of the India Association of Greater Boston, IAGB, and I am, privileged to be part of this panel. So we'll start this session right now. We'll start with the vaccine overview. And the first few questions, Anasuya, are for you. I'm going to start with the first question. Can you please provide more details about what mRNA means? mRNA is not a virus, then what it is?
Yeah, definitely. Very important question. So the COVID-19 virus, when it goes into the body and infects the cells, it actually has these proteins on the surface called spike proteins. These are the proteins that allow the virus to go inside and infect us. So what we need to get an effective vaccine is basically scientists are taking that spike protein, somehow getting that to be made in our bodies so that our immune system can look at that spike protein and mount an immune response to it. So that later on, if we ever get the real virus and we see the spike protein on that virus, our body is ready to fight and take care of the infection. So there are different ways of getting this spike protein to be made in our bodies. One of the novel ways that they're using for these mRNA vaccines now is something called mRNA or messenger RNA. Messenger RNA is basically the genetic code that's used to make the spike protein. So the messenger RNA is given to us, the messenger RNA enters our cells, and then our cells uses that genetic material, the messenger RNA, to then make the protein, the spike protein. And then that allows our immune system to recognize that spike protein and build immunity. It's important to note that this spike protein is just a fragment, a small piece of the virus, not the virus itself. So we cannot get sick from COVID-19 virus from this material. And the other important thing I want to say is that this genetic material doesn't actually have the ability to enter the nucleus of our cells. So it doesn't have the ability to actually interfere or inject itself and alter our DNA. So it's very, very safe. In fact, this messenger RNA material, it disintegrates very quickly. So, so that's how messenger RNA works. It's not the virus. It's just a way to make a piece of the virus so that our body can make immunity to it.
Great. So just to focus that we are actually only talking about the US vaccine for the first portion of this. We will talk about the India vaccines also a little later. So the next question for Anasuya again is the difference between J&J, Pfizer, and Moderna.
Yes, so Pfizer came out first in the US and then shortly followed by Moderna. Both of them use this messenger RNA, mRNA technology. So those are mRNA vaccines. The J&J vaccine that came out later uses a slightly different technology. So again, it wants us to, our body to have the ability to make the spike protein. But instead of using messenger RNA, what it does is it takes actual DNA that codes for this protein. And then this DNA is introduced into our cells through a completely unrelated, harmless virus called adenovirus. Okay, it's actually a common virus that gives us the colds and things like that. But they engineered this adenovirus to be inactive. So once it goes into our cells, it delivers the DNA for the spike protein, and then that's it. It doesn't harm us, it doesn't spread to other cells. The sole purpose of this adenovirus is to bring the DNA into our cells. And then from that DNA, the same process, spike protein is made, and then our body's immune system recognizes the spike protein and builds immunity to it. So that's how J&J is slightly different. But all three vaccines are currently approved in the US. Of course, there was a little blip with the J&J vaccine, which we'll be talking about later.
Thank you. So as we know that the J&J vaccine is a one-time dose, Pfizer and Moderna are taken 2 times, 21 and 28 days apart. Why this difference in the number of days? Can I get a dose after 2 months? Can I interchange, take Pfizer the first time, Moderna the second time, and vice versa?
So yes, so the Pfizer is approved to be given as 2 shots, 21 days apart. Moderna also 2 shots, 28 days apart, and J&J is only 1 shot. Pfizer is approved for 16 years and older, and Moderna and J&J for 18 years and older. Why? Because that's what they studied. These companies, when they come up with vaccine or any medication, anything like that, it's all based on clinical trials, and they look at different doses, different dosing schedules, and then based on those studies, they go by what was most effective. And so for the Pfizer one, it was most effective when it was given as 2 shots to 21 days apart, and so on. So that's where these come from. I just want to take a moment to also mention that there's a lot of talk about efficacy between these 2 vaccines as the difference. Honestly, when the FDA, ventured into this or started looking at these vaccines, the goal was actually 50% effectiveness. That was what our goal was. In fact, flu vaccines often from year to year are somewhere between the 20 to 60% range. So 50% efficacy was the goal. And guess what? All 3 far exceeded that expectation. Lucky for us, lucky for humanity. Yes, Pfizer and Moderna's clinical trials reported 95% efficacy, and J&J, I think worldwide was a little bit lower, in America around 75%, but we should caution people not to make direct comparisons between the 2 and say, oh, well, I want Pfizer, I want Moderna, because it's like comparing apples and oranges. These vaccines were not compared head to head in the same clinical trial. So when you have different clinical trials and you're trying to make comparisons and conclusions, that's never accurate. The other thing people are saying is that J&J clinical trials were done a few months after Pfizer and Moderna clinical trials were conducted. What that means is that the time when J&J clinical trials were being conducted, there were a lot more new variants out there. The number of COVID cases around the world was at a much higher incidence. And so that could have influenced some of this difference in data. So just wanted to sort of, warn people to refrain from the temptation of trying to compare in terms of efficacy.
One more question for you, Anasuya. If once I get the vaccine, am I set for life? And what is the importance of revaccination?
Yeah, actually, we don't know yet. We're waiting. There is some indication that we may need booster shots after the first 2 shots of Pfizer and Moderna, as well as the 1 shot of the J&J to keep the immunity going. But we'll have to wait and see. And also in terms of Pfizer and Moderna, the 21 days and the 28 days is what's recommended. If you notice, for those of you who've already gotten your vaccines, the second shot is scheduled usually right around that time frame. Plus or minus 2-3 days is okay. And the CDC actually said that up to 6 weeks, in fact, would be okay if there's a reason to. Don't delay it just for no reason. But if there's a shortage of a particular vaccine at your vaccine site and they give you your second dose up to 6 weeks is fine. Now, what happens after 6 weeks? No one knows, right? So, I mean, I guess probably best to go ahead and get that second dose, but we don't know how efficacious it would be. We don't know if the second dose given more than 6 weeks later will have the same effect. So definitely try to stay on schedule. Definitely get the second dose. Don't skip it if you can. And up to 6 weeks would be okay, but definitely try not to go more than that. And as far as interchangeability between Pfizer and Moderna, well, J&J is just one dose, so the question doesn't even come up. But for Moderna and Pfizer, you're supposed to stick with the same vaccine. That's what's recommended. Again, why? Because we don't know. No one has done the study to mix it up. We don't know if it would be equally effective. So why take the chance? Stick to the same one. I think the CDC did say that, in exceptional circumstances, that, getting one and the other for the second may be acceptable, but they're definitely not encouraging it, and they're definitely not officially recommending it. So important to keep that in mind.
That's a great answer, because there have been patients who have, when you meet people, it's like, okay, I got the allergic reaction with Moderna, so can I take Pfizer the second time? That's been happening. So this is a great answer. It really helps that, try to stick with the one, even if it is, you have a small, bump in your arm for a couple of days, it's still okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Priya, I'm going to move to you for the next couple of questions. The FDA approval process, how are these vaccines approved, and what is emergency use authorization?
Yeah, thank you, Sushil. So first, I just want to say it's extremely important to know that all of the US-based COVID-19 vaccines, so Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J, underwent a rigorous testing protocol in tens of thousands of study participants to ensure the safety of the vaccine. And so typically in a clinical trial, there are 4 phases of the clinical trial, and one phase follows another. So typically it's phase 1 followed by phase 2, then phase 3. So the reason that these vaccines were expedited were all the first 3 phases were done simultaneously. So one of the downfalls of this is it costs a lot of money to invest into a vaccine, or any study for that matter. So typically that's why it's phase 1 followed by phase 2 and 3. But given the global crisis and the need for urgency for a vaccine to save lives, these first 3 phases were done simultaneously, and the vaccine approval process, the vaccine availability process was expedited. And so emergency use authorization is a way for the FDA to expedite the availability and the use of medical therapies, such as the COVID-19 vaccine, in a public health emergency like the COVID-19 pandemic. So, so that's how we were able to get the vaccine sooner. And like Ansia was saying, we're incredibly lucky that within a year we have many vaccines available to us with a high efficacy, and we're able to get it.
Thank you. So what is the age criteria for these vaccines currently, and what is the age that the clinical trials are being held currently?
Yeah, so currently Moderna and Johnson & Johnson are approved for ages 18 and above, and then Pfizer is approved for ages 16 and above. So just recently, there were clinical trials completed for both Pfizer and Moderna looking at ages 12 and 15. And so Pfizer has submitted that for emergency use authorization, and they're waiting. And Moderna will be doing that in a couple of weeks. So, and what's interesting is actually Pfizer data showed that in this age group, the vaccine actually was 100% effective in ages 12 to 15 compared to those that are older. So that's like incredible. And so hopefully emergency use authorization will go through soon. And there's clinical trials now, they're enrolling patients or individuals ages 6 months to 12 years old now. So hopefully if the safety and efficacy is measured in that age group, then school-age children by the fall, it would be more safe for these individuals to go back to school and hopefully have some normalcy as well.
Great. So this is a question that's very common. Is the vaccine safe for pregnant and breastfeeding patients?
Yeah, so this question does come up a lot, even in my patients, even though I'm not OB/GYN, so just to preface that. So currently the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecology have said that they, for COVID-19 vaccines, not to withhold that from pregnant patients and breastfeeding patients. So it's available to them. But it's important to note that in the original trials for Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson, pregnant patients actually were not studied. So the safety of it in pregnant patients were not studied because those patients were not included in the original studies. However, we do have data to show that in pregnant patients who do get COVID-19 and are symptomatic, these patients actually have more severe illness compared to patients who are not pregnant. So like in everything in medicine, it's important to weigh the risk versus benefits, the comorbidities, and, for these pregnant patients to speak with their OB about, whether they think it's safe for them to get the vaccine, and always weigh the risk and benefits of it.
Can I make one other sort of comment? So you're absolutely right that pregnant people are particularly vulnerable to having more severe illness from COVID-19. And we now have data that suggests this, but the American College of Gynecology recommends that COVID vaccines not be withheld from pregnant or breastfeeding patients. I'm sorry, I wasn't sure if you were going to go through that.
You can go ahead. Yeah.
And the CDC came out with new guidance, which Dr. Priya will tell us.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead. Yeah, so it's interesting, the wording, but you can elaborate. Please go ahead, Rag.
Yeah, so I think the CDC has said that it is, especially for Pfizer and Moderna, that there is emerging evidence that pregnant patients can get vaccinated. And so I would defer to your primary physician or your gynecologist, but also take a good look at the CDC guidance. And there is emerging data collected out of 18 countries of 2,100 pregnant women who found that, COVID doesn't spare people of different ages, and certainly does not spare pregnant women. In fact, they have more complications of preterm birth, severe illness, death, and pregnancy complications. So if there was hesitancy, if you are pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant, I would say that there is more data suggesting that it is safer for you to get vaccinated.
So to follow up on that question, is there a trimester that would be considered the safest if they are having doubts about getting the vaccine because they have a baby growing in their tummy? Is there a particular trimester that would be considered the safest to do it if they get the vaccine?
So I'm not aware of a particular trimester. I think as Dr. Ragini was alluding to, we're still coming out with data. But I do know, and Ragini, maybe you know more, third trimester, I know that pregnant patients who do get COVID during the third trimester had a higher likelihood of severe illness and poor outcomes who got COVID earlier in the trimester. So that kind of follows along the line, supporting getting the vaccine, protecting yourself from COVID. I mean, like this whole discussion, that we're all talking about, it's always the risk versus benefits of the COVID vaccine versus the risk of getting COVID and the comorbidities associated with that and the complications that you can get from COVID itself. So on a personal note, I actually have a friend who's a doctor, and she unfortunately got COVID during her third trimester. She's an anesthesiology resident. And, even though she had COVID during her third trimester of pregnancy, she tested her antibodies a month later and they were gone. And so she actually decided, so she went ahead and got the COVID vaccine. So unfortunately, she was about to get it, but then got COVID instead, poor thing. And then she still went ahead and got the COVID vaccine in her third trimester, and she delivered a healthy baby girl just a week ago. So
great, that's awesome.
I
Next
think
question.
that, sorry, one thing. I do think that being an informed consumer in this day and age is really critical, that going and sometimes even reviewing some data that is coming out from research studies is something that I would advise you all to do, right? Because we're all kind of learning about vaccines and their safety and long-term impacts together. We are no more experts than probably you all are. And so I would say that the New England Journal just came out with a study looking at sort of self-reported complications for pregnant women, and there were no sort of obvious safety signals. So I would say if you all have questions, go to your primary physician, go to your gynecologist, but also consider looking at some of this primary literature because we all are reviewing it with you as the patient.
So Sushil, before we go, sorry, Priya. Okay, before we go on, I just wanted to answer a few chat questions that has come up. So Arvind, for your mother, 87-year-old with the comorbidities and on a blood thinner, it's completely safe for her to take the vaccine. Again, most of these questions are going to be answered as we go through. And for Nisha and Bhavish, as Priya mentioned, Pfizer has been studying right now for 6 months and older. Is that right, Priya?
So right now, Pfizer and Moderna are enrolling 6 months to 12 years old, and the data for 12 to 15 just came out. So their child's 3 years old. Yeah. So for 6 months, well, they're currently enrolling participants, both Pfizer.
So we don't know yet when that will come out, but the studies are ongoing for that.
There was one question which is very similar, Dr. Tushar, which has been asked on the chat, is again about the fertility. The question was, can my 16-year-old daughter or son get infertility as a side effect of the vaccine? While it might not be a concern for a 40-plus-year-old individual, is this concern a really valid concern?
Yeah, so first of all, there's no data to support that the COVID-19 vaccines cause infertility. And so it's interesting, on the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecology, ACOG website, they specifically talk about this because I think there's been a lot of talk about it. So they specifically went ahead and said that this has been scientifically disproven, is actually what they've said. So there's no evidence to show that this vaccine causes infertility. And they even went ahead and said that this has been scientifically disproven. And so they did also mention that it's important that all individuals that want to get the COVID-19 vaccine, and for individuals that it's available to, that they get the COVID-19 vaccine, even if they are interested in becoming pregnant in the future. So it's important to note that this does not cause infertility now, nor in the future, obviously. And so it's important to note that. Yeah, a lot of questions have come up about that.
This is a great answer. There are a lot of people who have been asking this, so that's fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Priya.
And one last, there's one more that says, if you have allergic reaction to other medications, can you still take the vaccine? Yes, you can. You could have allergies to penicillin, Cipro, any other antibiotics or certain other medications. You're not contraindicated to take the vaccine. Even if you had allergies to some other vaccine, unless there are certain ingredients that you're allergic to, which we'll go through in a few seconds, you are still okay to take the vaccine. Sorry, go ahead, Sushil.
Yes, the next question's for you anyway, Dr. Tushar.
Okay.
So
all right, I'm ready, I guess.
To actually go to the section where we're talking about allergic reactions and risks of reinfection. So there was a time when J&J was not recommended. So the question did come before last Friday. Why is J&J not recommended anymore? You probably have a new answer for that. Can I have Pfizer or Moderna if I had taken J&J?
Okay, so first of all, as you know, that the J&J vaccine has been reinstated. So there were a small number of patients. I believe total 6.8 million patients received the J&J vaccine, and there were 6 people who has had blood clots, and they were sinus thrombosis. It was a cerebral sinus thrombosis. Those were the most common complication that happened in those 6 patients. All 6 patients were between 18 and 48 years of age. Surprisingly, older patient tolerated the vaccine well. And that's why there was a pause. They just wanted to make sure that they study it a little bit more and just make sure that it is safe. And then they deemed, I think they had several emergency meetings, and then they deemed that it's safe to take it. So that's why it's been reinstated. And yes, so if you have taken J&J vaccine, you do not need to take a Pfizer or Moderna as additional vaccine.
And Dr. Tushar, I think you were last mentioning, like in terms of the risk of blood clots from J&J versus birth control versus COVID.
Correct.
Right. And so if you want to, you can go over.
Sure. Yeah. So we were just talking on the panel that if you think about it, the birth control pills has been approved and been used now all the time. Just think about it, that the birth control pill rate of thrombophlebitis or the blood clots from the birth control pill is 6%, while with the J&J vaccine, 6 people out of a 6.8 million people got those blood clots. So if you, I'm not good at math, but I'm sure it's like less than 1%.
Yeah, 1 in a million is what they were saying.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think you have greater chances of getting struck by lightning than having a blood clot. If that helps put into perspective the risk of you having a blood clot as a consequence of the J&J vaccine.
They were actually saying the risk of blood clots with COVID itself is like, I think 50 times, like 10 to 50 times or something. So the risk of getting a blood clot from the COVID disease is much higher than from the J&J vaccine, obviously.
So what are the common side effects to these vaccines, and what can we do to minimize them? This is for Dr. Tushar again.
Okay, so most common side effect that most people are going to feel is redness, pain, some tenderness at the site of injection, and some other side effects like fever, chills, body ache, some headaches. Those are common side effects that that most people would feel. And it's okay to take, by the way, any Tylenol, ibuprofen. This is just your body developing immune reaction, inflammatory reaction into your system, and that's why you're getting these side effects. So this side effect shouldn't discourage you from taking the vaccine. It's completely okay to take Tylenol, ibuprofen. We do discourage taking Tylenol, ibuprofen before you go to get the vaccine. So they should be taken post-vaccine, not before you go get the vaccine.
I just want to add real quick, because some of the questions are coming too, that, having other cardiac problems or, kidney problems or diabetes, any of these other types of medical problems is not a reason not to get the vaccine. The vaccine is safe and effective. In fact, as a cancer doctor, I have several of my patients on chemotherapies. Their immune system is down, and yet they are encouraged, and it is recommended that even they get their vaccines. So just wanted to add that in, since some of the questions were coming up about that.
So I think I have a few more questions for Tushar, and then obviously Ragini, and then we'll also have the Q&As. But we are at the midway point. So do we want to talk about the COVID situation in India and how people who are attending this session, how they can help the folks in India? Ragini, do you want to take that?
Sure. So, as you all know, since the past year, we've had pretty large outbreaks in various countries, and India, for the most part, had a larger outbreak last year. But since the past month or so, we have seen an exponential rise in cases in metropolitan cities, so Delhi, Mumbai, and now it's sort of spreading throughout the country at a rate which is unimaginable, where some cities like Delhi have a positivity rate of over 30%, and that's of the individuals that are being tested. So as physicians and as folks in the Indian community, I think many of us have had family members that have been affected, and whether they're hospitalized or whether they're in recovery. I think we have felt not only a massive amount of grief, but a lot of anxiety and frustration on like, what can we do? And how can we support our family members? And I think being educated about vaccines is critical, because right now in India, the vaccines have been rolled out, but there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy. And so talking to your families about getting vaccinated as soon as possible is critical. Secondly, you all have gone through social distancing and wearing masks. And I think reiterating same good public health practices are really important when you're having conversations with your families. Wearing a mask all the time, trying to avoid unnecessary travel, trying to avoid going outside. I think if you all remember last March, April, there was a massive amount of panic in our country, and there was a lot of hoarding as a consequence. And I think what's happening is the same thing with our family and friends abroad. And so reiterating that to not be panicked, that it is a virus, it is something that you can manage on your own at home, and then to watch out for signs and symptoms of having worsened or more severe disease are really important. But I think the folks on board at IAGB have reviewed a couple ways that you as the community members can help support and not feel like you can't do anything, because really this is a time for our community to come together and not only help with potential fundraising, but help provide emotional support to our family members who are abroad, because they are going through a lot. And many epidemiologists don't think that the peak in India is going to reach, at least for the next several weeks. So we're in it for the long haul. Sushil, do you want to go through ways that folks can get involved and help?
Sure. I was hoping you would do that, but I can do it, not a problem. So the doctors here, identified a few organizations that you could actually either support it, by, giving them a call and find out, what other different ways that you could support. Some of them are taking donations directly, and then directly using those funds for helping, the cases. There's shortage of oxygen in many hospitals in India. Certain places, oxygen supply completely ran out, and patients died because there was no more oxygen. So, there is definitely need. Whatever can be done to help is very, very important. So we have a couple of organizations that we have identified. One of them is called khalsaaid.org. We will, provide this in a follow-up on the IAGB website also, as well as in the email that will go to the IAGB members. But if you are not an IAGB member and you're hearing this session, you could visit the iagb.org at the end of the day today, and you will get information about this particular organization. The second organization is the Seva USA, which is SEWA USA. And this organization, if you go to that sevausa.org, they are also having help related to COVID-19. And the third organization is a relatively new nonprofit organization that is focused on community service and helping anyone that is in need. It's called LASA Foundation. And the details for that, on how to even donate to LASA Foundation, they will directly provide the funds that are collected to organizations in India that require help for COVID-19 patients out there. These are the three organizations that we have listed out here. If there's any more that we have that we find out in the next day or so, we will keep adding it on the IAGB website. So please do visit the website over the next week if you can, and we will provide as much details as possible on how we can help our fellow countrymen in India.
I just want to reiterate, there's a lot of capacity to help. And I want you to think back to March and April and May, when many of our community in the Boston area really came together to make masks, to help folks out, to bring groceries, to bring PPE, etc. And I think that this is really the time that we can band together and make a massive impact for our friends and family in India. So And that's really with not only providing emotional support by reiterating the importance of public health guidance, whether it's CDC based or even Indian public health based. I think reiterating that in a moment of panic is really important. And then lastly, with building capacity and helping with fundraising. I think that there is a critical shortage of many necessary supplies that we can help with all of your guys' support. So thank you.
Great. We'll get back to now the next question for Dr. Tushar.
Okay.
What are the contraindications to get the COVID-19 vaccine?
So contraindication, again, as I mentioned before, unless you're allergic to ingredient called the polysorbitol or polyethylene glycol. These are the substances or chemicals that's used in forming this or making this vaccine. So unless you have specific allergies to those, is only the contraindication for this vaccine. So I mean, if you did have some anaphylactic reaction to some other substances, you can contact your allergy specialist. But otherwise, even if you did had some anaphylactic reaction to, for example, peanut butter or almond or etc., it is not a contraindication to take the vaccine.
And I just want to add something on a personal note, Dr. Tushar. So I have an anaphylactic reaction to peanuts and pine nuts. And I've been to the ER 3 or 4 times in my life. And I got the Moderna vaccine, both doses, no problems at all. And I know several friends who have anaphylactic reactions to other drugs as well as food allergies, and they all did fine. So as Dr. Tushar said, it's important to speak with your doctor, but also to know that's not a contraindication to get the vaccine. And they do observe patients with a history of anaphylaxis for 30 minutes after getting the vaccine. So instead of the usual 15 minutes.
Yeah. And as we answered that question in the chat box, there's even if you had allergic reaction to any of the antibiotics or some other medications, or as Dr. Gunturi mentioned, even if you have some type of a cancer or you are on a chemotherapy, you should still consider getting the vaccine.
I will say there are certain vaccines that are a little bit less, they have a less severe side effect profile. So the mRNA vaccines tend to have slightly more side effects as compared to the non-mRNA vaccines. So for instance, J&J, which is a one-time dose, and it has less side effects. And then when you go to India, they have other types of vaccines as well that have different side effect profiles. But the CDC has been tracking vaccine adverse events through a vaccine adverse event reporting system. And we are learning more and more if people have adverse reactions versus anaphylaxis. And I think it's really critical, and Dr. Tushar has sort of mentioned this already, to know that there is a difference between a life-threatening anaphylactic allergic reaction as compared to like side effects.
And that is the follow-up question actually. And that is, what if I get a sick or allergic reaction with 1 dose of Pfizer or Moderna? Can I skip the second dose? So this is what kind of reaction should only make them skip the second dose? So that is definitely a question that people ask.
So as Dr. Ragini mentioned, some of the pain at the site of injection, some fever, chills, body ache, these are known side effect. This is not considered allergic reaction. So when we say sick versus allergic reaction, these are expected reaction to the vaccine. So there's no reason for you to skip the second shot. In fact, it's just your body is preparing your immune system to fight this virus, and that's why you are feeling those. So you definitely do not want to skip the second dose. Now, allergic reaction. There are several types of allergic reaction, and as we already mentioned, anaphylactic reaction is the one that we call it a severe reaction, and we define anaphylactic reaction as somebody who needs EpiPen or somebody who needs to go to the emergency room because they had severe swelling or shortness of breath or etc. And then emergency room physician will tell you that this is a severe allergic reaction. So those patients should not get the second shot. But otherwise, everybody else should get the second shot. There is also something we call it immediate reaction. The immediate reaction is the reaction that you get within 4 hours. So as you know, after this vaccine, we have you wait for 15 minutes before you go home. But even on your drive home, within first 4 hours, if you start getting hives, if you're starting to get swelling or wheezing or very short of breath, then it is recommended that you avoid the second dose. But those are, that's the difference between the allergic reaction, severe allergic reaction and a mild allergic reaction.
Yeah, so
Dr. Tushar, we have a question coming up from Arvind. Is it safe to take the vaccine if one is allergic to brinjal or eggplant or pineapple? And are there any contraindications with anti-tubercular drugs? And I'm going to say no.
That?
Sure. No,
Go
you
ahead,
can take it. Take
Yeah.
that vaccine. That there's no contraindication. If you're allergic to any sort of food or like not just as Dr. Priya mentioned, there's no contraindication for you to take that vaccine. And then in terms of interactions with different types of medications like anti-tubercular drugs, I'm assuming that's isoniazid or rifampin, it's a one-time vaccine. And so we have not noticed any sort of interactions with medications of these vaccines.
So there is a follow-up question here also again is, let's say I take the vaccine. After how many days of fever, chills, and pain should I consider going to the doctor?
The usual duration, I think, is about 2 to 5 days or so. It should really resolve after that. If it's continuing longer than that, that maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe you have an unrelated situation going on, and maybe that would be a good time to call your doctor and check it out. But I would say, yeah, about 2 to 5 days is the usual course.
And you should start to see the decline in your symptoms. You should start to feel the improvement. If you're feeling worse after 5 days, then it's definitely, you need to seek the medical attention.
Right.
And I think it's important to know, in the beginning when the vaccines were distributed, there's, COVID was very high. I mean, it's still high, but it was much higher a few months ago. And there are some people who say they got COVID a week or two after getting the vaccine. So their symptoms were like COVID symptoms after the vaccine, but it persisted. Like that Dr. Tushar said, their symptoms got worse. It's important to note, like Dr. Ansia was saying before, they did not get COVID from the COVID vaccine. Okay, so these patients did not get COVID from the COVID vaccine. It's just that they got infected, unfortunately, very close to the time of the COVID vaccine, and then they got COVID. Even in India, maybe Dr. Ragini, you can speak about this more, but I've heard a lot of talk about people in India after the first vaccine getting COVID. And, so actually one of my cousins just asked me, she's like, oh, do you think that it's because they got the first dose of COVID vaccine? That's why they got COVID. I was like, no, they did not get COVID from the COVID vaccine. I think it's because after getting the first dose, or even before that, there's this euphoric effect and they think it's safe to go out and do high risk things and not socially distant. And as a result, unfortunately, they got COVID. Probably because they got the first dose of the COVID vaccine, their symptoms were less severe compared to if they didn't even get that first dose. But I don't know if the other doctors want to comment on that.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think, one, it's really critical for you to think back to what are these vaccines actually? The vaccines are not the viral vector. We're not infecting you with active infection. So you will not get COVID through the vaccine, just like you don't get the flu from the flu shot. But it is also important to realize why should you stick to these vaccine schedules? It's because it takes your body time to build immunity. So for J&J, it takes 2 weeks post-vaccination for you to build immunity. Similarly, for Moderna and Pfizer, it takes 2 weeks post the second vaccine for you to have over 90% effectiveness of immunity. So yes, there is a chance of developing breakthrough cases, even if you're fully vaccinated. And, when you're looking at data for vaccines. No vaccine is 100% effective. And so think about it this way. If you vaccinate 1 million people and a vaccine has 90% efficacy, about 100,000 people will have breakthrough infection, right? Vaccines are not cures. They reduce infection. They also reduce community transmission. But that's why it's important for one, everyone to get vaccinated. And two, for you to realize that breakthrough infections will probably happen, but it's really dependent on a couple of things. It's dependent on, how close you were exposed to someone else who had COVID, how viremic they were. So were they in the throes of their infection? And then how many times you're being exposed to people with COVID. So for instance, healthcare workers are at high risk of getting the coronavirus, primarily because they're exposed to this infection over and over again. So same thing. Vaccines are not perfect. They are effective in reducing infection, but breakthrough infections are certainly possible.
And I think, Dr. Ragini, you elaborated on a question that somebody just posted in the chat group. So they were, Nisha was asking, in general, with the vaccine in my body, is the advantage that I cannot get COVID, or is it the case that I can get COVID, but the impact of COVID will be low? So I think you elaborated.
Such a great question. So immunity is really interesting, right? It's your body's immunity has the ability to build a memory for an infection. So the point of these vaccines is they've identified this interesting, unique spike protein where we have built these vaccines so that if we are exposed to the coronavirus that has this unique identifier, then our body's immunity will go in hyper mode and say, okay, let me go attack this infection and prevent it from causing disease. So the benefit of having the vaccine is one, you build a memory for this infection so that if you are exposed to it, that one, you have less severe symptoms, and two, you may be asymptomatic. So it does not prevent you from getting the infection. It prevents you from having severe disease because it's sort of like when I talk about HIV to my patients, I think about immunity as the fighter cells in our body. So the COVID vaccine helps build fighter cells in our body against the coronavirus. That's the benefit. And that's what you want. You don't want to build immunity by getting the infection because the risk of having severe symptoms is quite high.
Like you're building.
So I'll just add to this that like when we talk about this 95% efficacy and all that, what we really are talking about is your ability to catch a severe infection that hospitalize you or put you in ICU. That's what we are talking about, that there's good 95% chance or more that you will not get a severe infection after getting 2 shots, or at least 2 weeks after your second shot.
Right.
And that's the most important today, especially in places where it's so high. If you have your second dose, there's already shortage of beds in India, for example, and there you're not getting to go to the hospital is a big deal, even if you get the COVID. So it's so very important, and I think that's what we're going to do is move to the next section after the next question. We're going to talk about the vaccines in India, which Ragini will also give a little bit of information about. But the last question for you, Tushar, before we go to focusing on the India vaccines a little bit, is why is there so much negativity and negative press about the vaccine? Why are there 50% of the people who are not wanting to, get it, or why? So what's the reason for this negativity?
I think it started off, or I think Priya and Anastasia covered it earlier, that I think a lot of time this emergency use of vaccine was a novel concept to a lot of people. A lot of people thought that these vaccines were rushed and not enough attention to detail was done, and as a result, they felt like these vaccines are too quick in the market. Normally takes years to develop these vaccines, and as a result, I think a lot of people were skeptical about it. But as we know, I think just to throw the numbers out, Pfizer studied about 44,000 people. Moderna and J&J studied about 30,000 each. So think about it, it's almost more than 90,000 people, closer to 100,000 people were studied in this in this. So just to reassure everyone that they are not rushed as people think that they were rushed. And I think a lot of people were confused between the side effect versus this allergic reaction. A lot of people thought that this vaccines are, whether they are too strong or they have more side effect than the typical flu vaccines. So, and I think the social media sometimes give a pretty up-to-date information. At the same time, they spread a lot of false rumors as well, especially this changing your DNA thing. It just went viral on a social media. And this infertility thing also went viral on a social media, which was completely, in our opinion, completely wrong information. At least, nothing that has panned out so far from what CDC has recommended. So, so none of those things are true. And I think that's, and the long-term side effect, I think a lot of people are skeptical about long-term side effect, which we don't know at this point. I mean, it's too soon to say, but at this point, we do have to believe in science. We do have to believe in what went on in developing this vaccine. So I think those were some of the skepticism, in my opinion, that created some negativity in general public. Anybody else want to add anything to it?
I think the messenger RNA vaccines also took people by surprise a little bit, because it's a new type of vaccine that has never been, new technology that hasn't been used for a vaccine before. But messenger RNA technology has been around for years, has been developed, by scientists for years, and they were able to, harness that at the right moment and use it for this pandemic that needed a vaccine quickly. And so, so I think, the reason, there's nothing to be scared about the messenger RNA. It's not a novel technology in general. It's just that the scientists were able to use this technology for this. So I think that's important to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, and I think also the like you elaborated on the side effects. I think people were scared of the side effects of, and I know Dr. Tushar went over all this, but in terms of confusing the side effects from the vaccine from potentially the actual COVID. And I know I have a lot of patients that said they didn't want to get it because they were scared of the side effects. I have technicians and colleagues who said the same thing too. So, but at this point, millions of people have taken all of these vaccines. So in addition to the study participants, the 100,000 people, study participants, we now have millions of people who've taken this vaccine for almost 4 to 5 months, actually. So
Yep.
Very promising.
Great. So now we will go to a lot of questions related to India, and also how do you get yourself, now if you have made a decision, okay, this seems to be good, I need to get myself vaccinated. What is the next, how do you register? Yes, go ahead, Anasuya.
Before we go to the India vaccine section,
Yeah.
Just one more thing. The benefit of getting the vaccinations obviously is for your health. And some people are itching to open up society. And I think that's coming close once that we have enough people who've been vaccinated. But I just wanted to bring up the point that CDC has also recently issued guidelines on the behavior of fully vaccinated individuals. So if you are fully vaccinated, which means by definition 2 weeks after the J&J or 2 weeks after the second shot of Pfizer or Moderna, you can now, if you end up, again, limit travel, but if you do end up traveling, when you had to come back, we used to have to quarantine for 14 days or 7 days or whatever, or get a negative test. So you're exempt from doing those things. We can also now meet in small groups with other fully vaccinated individuals. So for example, grandchildren and grandparents are now for the first time being able to, to meet each other and give each other hugs. So
without mask.
It was like unmasked, which is huge.
Unmasked, without mask, they can see.
So these are little steps. Again, we're not ready to fully open society, and we can't, stretch this too far. I think CDC is doing a good job updating their website about what is okay after you've been fully vaccinated. So please do check that regularly. But I guess I just wanted to make a plug for the fact that not only is it for your health, but it'll also improve your social life a little bit. So it's nice. It's nice to get those extra perks.
Yes. So Ragini, for you, how do people in United States, let's focus on Massachusetts and New Hampshire, which is our local region here, get themselves registered if they've made their decision now on this panel, after hearing this panel, to get vaccinated?
So as of now, adults over the age of 16 in all 50 states, including Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., are eligible to get vaccinated against coronavirus. In the United States, we have 3 FDA-approved vaccines, Moderna, Pfizer, and J&J. In Massachusetts, I just put this in the chat. So if you're in the state of Massachusetts, you can register to get a vaccine. I would click on this link and then fill out the information. So they request name, address, date of birth, contact information, and a preferred method of communication. And after you do a pre-registration, then the vaccine schedulers will contact you and schedule you for an appointment. There are now several mass vaccination centers throughout the state of Massachusetts where that can facilitate you to get a vaccine. Secondly, if you do not have a computer, so everyone here has a computer, but for those family and friends who may not have Zoom, may not have a computer, may feel more comfortable over the phone, at least in the state of Massachusetts and New Hampshire, you can call 211 and they can facilitate pre-registration. They also have different folks in different languages through 211. So if you need interpreters for like Indian languages, you can help sort of register that way. Now, in the state of New Hampshire, it's a similar pre-registration guide, and I'm just going to put this in the chat, but essentially, if you go to your state government website, they have links on how to pre-register for vaccines, and it's a fairly easy process. I have done it. Several of my family and friends have done it, and most people get back to you within a day, if not several days, to schedule an appointment.
So I mentioned this, but in the beginning it was 75 years and older, and then they brought in healthcare workers, so they had all these categories. But now, as of at least in Massachusetts, as of April 19th, it's open for all adults, so no restrictions.
Yeah, I think over the age of 16, everyone is eligible to get vaccinated. So for the 16 and 17-year-olds, in some states, they need to be accompanied by an adult or a guardian. And they can only qualify for, I believe, the Pfizer vaccine, which is FDA approved for individuals less than age 18.
And FYI, for the people who are here in Massachusetts, even though I have access to the computer, I used 211 to register. It was very easy. I was tired of being on Zoom all the time and on the computer. So it's very easy. Just call at 8:30 in the morning. That's when they open. And it's literally, piece of cake. Within 5 minutes, you're all set and registered.
You wanted to talk to a human being? Is that what you were saying?
Exactly.
Those of you who live in a Lowell area, it's a very easy to log into Lowell General Hospital website, and it will just allow you to schedule your own. So,
yep, great. Next question for you, Ragini, is CDC recommendations for travel post-vaccination. I put a link also online, on the chat. But if you'd like to speak a little bit about what can you do after you're happily vaccinated 2 weeks post-vaccination.
Yeah, so Dr. Anasuya mentioned a lot of this, but there are so many benefits aside from building your immunity of getting a vaccine. It's really the CDC has found that it is safe for you to not only visit inside a house or a private setting without a mask if you're among other fully vaccinated people, but you can also travel domestically without pre-post travel testing. You can travel domestically without quarantining. You can travel internationally without a pre-travel test, depending on the destination. And you can also travel internationally without quarantining after travel. However, just because you have a vaccine does not mean you cannot stop wearing masks. You still need to wear masks, stay 6 feet apart from others, and avoid crowds in poorly ventilated spaces. Avoid medium to large size gatherings, and you need to watch for COVID symptoms. We do have evidence that suggests that if you have the COVID vaccine, there is not a lot of reason to get screening for COVID. And in fact, we have now data for healthcare workers where we prospectively looked at healthcare workers who were post-vaccination and they screened them for COVID to see, is there any benefit? Should we be worried about sort of COVID spreading post-vaccine? And we didn't find any evidence that suggested that or supported that we needed to do like asymptomatic screening. However, as we talked about, you can have breakthrough infections. So if you have fever, cough, if you've been exposed to someone with COVID, you should watch out for COVID symptoms and then appropriately get tested. So I would defer to the CDC guidance. The CDC website is actually quite excellent and they keep updating it based off of more updated research that's coming out on more social activities that you can engage in.
Okay.
Great.
Next question for you. The vaccines available in India are currently Covaxin and Covishield. What is the difference? How different they are also from Pfizer and Moderna, and can they wait to get Pfizer and Moderna if they feel that that's better?
So I would say the fact that vaccines were approved and they all went through a rigorous testing process, it doesn't matter which vaccine you get, frankly. Just get the vaccine, right? Like the only way we can stop this pandemic is by mass vaccination of everyone. It's not by picking and choosing what would be the most appropriate vaccine or which one offers you 5% more efficacy. Because ultimately, if everyone is not vaccinated, it doesn't matter. Okay. In terms of the types of vaccines that have been approved in India and that are being utilized, so there's 3 different vaccines that are being utilized in India. So it's Covaxin, which is an inactivated vaccine that was made in India through the Bharat Biotech circuit. And it is made of a killed coronavirus. So it is not a live virus, it is a dead virus. And essentially what happens is your body builds immunity to this dead virus and then builds your immunity towards COVID. And it has an efficacy rate of 81%. It's 2 doses, 4 weeks apart. Then the other one is called Covishield, and Covishield is similar to the J&J vaccine. It is through a viral vector, an adenovirus, and it's Covishield is also what we refer to as the AstraZeneca or Oxford virus, and it is so adenovirus is a weakened version of a common cold, and we use that as a vector to allow us to build immunity towards the coronavirus. It has a 90% 2-dose efficacy rate. So you take 2 doses and it gives you 90% effectiveness. And then there's Sputnik, which is a viral vector, similar to Covishield or J&J, and that is 2 doses, 92% efficacy, regardless, right? So we're just giving you like a menu of options. I don't care if you're in India, I don't care if you're in the United States, you should get vaccinated. As an infectious disease doctor, I think the only way we can stop this pandemic is through mass vaccination. If we don't do that, then we will never build an opportunity to have herd immunity and then just sort of move on through this pandemic, right? Like we will just have wave after wave after wave. And millions of people have been vaccinated. So it doesn't matter which one you get. All of them are effective. They have different side effect profiles. They might have like 1 or 2 doses, but wherever you have access to get a vaccine, unless you have a severe life-threatening contraindication, I would advise you to get vaccinated. I think, oh, go ahead, Dr. Priya.
No, I just wanted to reiterate kind of what I was alluding to in the beginning in terms of the whole, process of how these vaccines are approved. I think we're so lucky that we have an array of vaccines, available to us in a short period of time to help us conquer and fight this COVID-19. And so it's not like Dr. Ragini was saying, it's not about which vaccine to choose from. It's more that, thank goodness, we have an array of vaccines to help us fight this pandemic together. And like I was saying in the beginning, all of these vaccines have undergone rigorous testing to make sure that they are safe. And, so that's the important point. And the important thing is to get a vaccine, not which one to get one.
And honestly, you don't get a choice. So when you go to a vaccine clinic, it's not a menu. You don't get to pick which one you want. They'll just give you the one that's available, and you go for it. But waiting it out and waiting for another vaccine, those are not strategies that we recommend. Absolutely not. So go get it. Take the one that you get.
I think the other question that Sushil, you asked was, what if I'm coming from India, I get Covishield or I get Covaxin? Do I come here? Do I need to be worried about like other variants in the United States? Will I get more benefit, like better immunity by taking another vaccine? And we honestly don't have a lot of research on if you get multiple vaccines or multiple types of vaccines, if you have a greater immune response. In fact, we don't know. And I would not advise that. I think you should get vaccinated. And then, when the public health officials think it would be appropriate to get booster vaccines, then that would be most appropriate. But you should not be sort of getting revaccinated or with other agents unless it's advised by some specialist or physician.
Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on a booster, because that will be coming in next few months.
Yeah, exactly. So I think someone asked about this, is that, look, I have to get flu shots every year. Why is that? Well, that's because we have data that suggests that we have waning immunity, that the memory in our body's immune system only lasts for about 8 to 12 months for the flu vaccine, right? And so now we know that we need to sort of get annual flu vaccinations. We don't really have that data yet for the coronavirus. And we also don't know how long this immunity lasts, which is why probably research in the future will suggest whether or not there'll be a benefit of booster vaccines. Think about it, we get vaccines all the time. So you get a tetanus shot every 10 years. Why is that? It's because after 10 years, you have waning immunity towards all the things that are offered in the tetanus vaccine. So similarly, we need more data that tells us how, if and when we may need booster vaccines. Right now, we do not know. And so if you have gotten vaccinated within the last 12 months, I think you're probably okay. And I would defer to your government officials and public health guidance on whether or not a booster would be appropriate. I think piggybacking off of this is the whole issue about variants. So why do we care about variants? We keep hearing about the UK variant, the South Africa variant, the Brazil variant, and now the Indian variant, and how in India they might have multiple mutations. Well, viruses are weak. Viruses also mutate all the time. And not all mutations lead to disease, right? But what we do know is some mutations can lead to certain viruses being more infective, right? So you can catch it more quickly. So for instance, we know that for the UK variant. And then the more worrisome thing that epidemiologists and virologists are tracking are, do any of these mutations impact that critical, unique spike protein, right? Our immune system is only identifying the spike protein if we have a mutation that reduces our ability to identify that spike protein for the infection. It may make the vaccines less effective. So Dr. Fauci has been speaking as all the NIH and researchers have been looking actively at genomic sequencing of all the viruses to see if we need to make modifications to vaccines as these variants come along. But for now, what we know is all of the Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J have good coverage for all of the identified variants that we have seen, at least in the United States, and that if any further modifications to vaccines need to be made, they will be made in the coming year.
Fantastic. So we have a few questions that came in the email. I have a last question also there, which is what is happening? Why is India right now having such a huge outbreak? But we probably want to keep that for the end. There are a few questions that came in my email, which I will actually read out. One of them is a little long email, but it's from a person by the name Ashoka Sen. And he said that I am a patient of pericarditis with a large pericardial effusion. And he had pericardiocentesis in 2019, he was referred to the infectious disease department for further treatment. He went through 12 months drugs course, and since May of last year, he's been keeping physically well, but no blood tests, blood pressure checkups, etc. And he is asking that, I've had some somatization disorder, and my humble question is whether I should go ahead with the COVID-19 vaccine or not with my kind of health condition. He is in India, looks like. It says, because he gave me the options of Covishield or Covaxin, and he's saying it's a matter of life or death for him. So please provide the information for him. And he is on the call.
I think you should be the first one in the line to get the shot, to get the vaccine, because you may even be immunocompromised because you may be on a prednisone, one of the steroid that we use for pericarditis that's lasting you that long. So I think you should be getting that vaccine ASAP.
Yeah, so none of his medical history is a contraindication to getting any of these vaccines. And if anything, like Dr. Patel said, high risk for complications from COVID if he were to get infected. So he should go and get the vaccine right away.
Awesome, great, thank you. One another question in the email is, I had Guillain-Barré syndrome, and hence I do not even take the annual flu vaccine. Are there any studies about COVID and GBS? And if you recommend it, which one should I take? I think you probably answered that question in many ways, but if there's anything particular to this one.
Yeah, so I think in your particular instance for Guillain-Barré, I think it would be advisable for you to look at the CDC guidance on individuals who've had Guillain-Barré as a consequence of vaccines, whether or not it would be something like a risk-benefit ratio, conversation you're going to have with your physician. I don't think Guillain-Barré is an absolute contraindication, but I do think that you need to look at the CDC guidance on other individuals who may have had Guillain-Barré as a consequence of vaccines.
So it remains a risk that Guillain-Barré can happen, though there are not a lot of cases. So like Dr. Ragini said, you should probably follow the CDC guideline or ask your physician or ID specialist or allergy immunology specialist.
But there's to the second part of her question, if I do get a vaccine, which one? They're all the same. So it's not good for the GBS patients. So just because you had that reaction for a previous vaccine doesn't mean necessarily that it's a contraindication for this one. But also that, there's not one particular vaccine that would be.
I think so I wanted to bring up a question that I got on breastfeeding. And can nursing mothers receive the COVID vaccine? And is there any sort of protective antibodies that moms can pass on to babies? And the answer is yes. And now we have data from the University of Washington School of Medicine that shows that nursing mothers, if they are vaccinated, do pass on protective antibodies to infants. We do need more data to see the safety and efficacy of COVID vaccines in lactating people, but it doesn't seem to cause any harm. So for those women who have had their babies, who are breastfeeding, it is perfectly reasonable to continue breastfeeding. We haven't seen anything negative happen, and you may be actually passing on protective antibodies to your children.
Yeah, great point, Ragini. The other question I just wanted to bring up is, so I specialize in uveitis and I have a lot of immunocompromised patients. And so it just, I'm not going to elaborate too much details because you should speak to your treating physician about it, whether or not to get the COVID vaccine. You should get the COVID vaccine, especially these patients, but whether or not to hold your immunosuppressive therapy. So currently we are recommending for all the patients to continue their immunosuppressive therapy and get the COVID vaccine. And there's actually a trial being done at MGH looking at testing the antibody levels of these patients who are immunocompromised and whether they're mounting a good enough immune response against COVID to protect them. And so far, I mean, they're not releasing the data, but I have some patients and they're all telling me so far they are, yes, they have antibodies that are effective so far, which is wonderful. So when Dr. Tushar was talking about prednisone, you know, for the other patient, and as he was saying, it's so important for these patients to get the COVID-19 vaccine because they are more susceptible to getting infections, especially COVID.
And I think just critical to remember, the vaccines are not live viruses. So you are not, even if your immune system is weak, the vaccine will not give you the virus. It might reduce your ability to build antibodies for the vaccine, but it will not cause infection. So if you have a weak immune system, definitely get the vaccine because you are at high risk of having severe disease from COVID.
So Ragini, we have about 6 minutes remaining. Vaishali Agade, who is our Vice President of IGB, would like to close the session in the last couple of minutes. So if you could discuss about the reasons for the serious issue of COVID today in India. And, if there's, there are people from India on this call who probably want to hear about this too. And, talk about what could have been the reason that has caused this issue and, how can we prevent that from happening in the United States? I know we are all getting, most of the people are getting ourselves vaccinated here, but it's important for people to know.
Sure. I will say one thing that came in the comment box. If I've had COVID, should I get the COVID vaccine? The answer is yes. And typically we recommend that you wait about 90 days post like becoming asymptomatic. So you build some innate immunity by having the infection itself, but we don't know how long that antibodies last, right? We know that some of those antibodies from having the infection might wane. And so that's why we still advise you to get the vaccine. But typically you wait a little bit of time. So no one really knows. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Initially, they were advising waiting 3 months, but I think CDC revised that and said now, as long as you recover from, once you're out of quarantine, you can actually go and get the vaccine.
Oh, awesome. Thank you for that correction.
Convalescent plasma, right? If you got convalescent plasma, I think they still have you wait 3 months, but otherwise, right, they removed that guideline. I think it was because there was a shortage in the beginning and.
Yeah, convalescent plasma and monoclonal antibody treatments still need to wait 90 days. But for the natural infection patients, once you're recovered and out of quarantine, you can get your vaccine now.
Okay, thank you for that. So the Indian outbreak right now, we're not really sure what was the precipitating factor. I think there's a multitude of things. We know that this is an airborne viral infection that has been leading to pandemics leading to outbreaks throughout the world. And I think there were probably multiple reasons why there was an outbreak. I think vaccine hesitancy is one of the reasons, right? If we don't make mass vaccination a priority, then people don't want to get it. So low vaccination rates were probably contributing. I think the sheer volume of patients and population in India has a lot to do with it. And I think as the weather gets better and we've been, we've had a really hard year. And I think most of us I think when we get complacent about social distancing and wearing masks, that certainly contributes to outbreaks, not only in India, but outbreaks anywhere throughout the world. So that, and then perhaps mass gatherings had contributed, and maybe there's this contribution of having multiple mutations. So there's rising evidence of genomic sequencing of the COVID virus that is circulating in metropolitan cities in India that suggests that multiple mutations might be contributing, making the virus more infectious. So will we ever know why there's this second really devastating wave that's happening in India? No, but we now have a year of experience on how to stop it. And we have a year of experience on what to do to prevent it from happening, right? So social distancing, wearing masks, avoiding any sort of travel, avoiding meeting people, any gatherings, staying at home. I think that's what helped us get out of our outbreaks every single time. And I think the physicians and public health leadership in India is doing the same. I think it's much more devastating for many of us because we've had personal, not only have many of us been working on the front lines here, but when it hits so close to home, it is really devastating. So I think right now it's so critically important for our Indian community to band together and support each other and realize that many of us are going through probably hell, and be the supports that our families back in India need. And then reaching out to these field nonprofit organizations that are doing some excellent work by providing oxygen, by doing sort of telemedicine, by giving food to folks who need it, etc. I think we have a big opportunity here to come together as a community to really help our friends and family back home.
Thank you, Ragini. I think I will have Vaishali speak for a couple of minutes and then a vote of thanks will come along. But Vaishali, join.
Thank you, Sushil. First of all, thank you so much for bringing this panel here, Sushil. And to all you doctors, Dr. Ragini, Dr. Priya, Dr. Anasuya, Dr. Tushar, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing this invaluable information about everything on the vaccines. All of you healthcare professionals, frontline workers, thank you. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts for everything that you do and everything that you have sacrificed, your resilience around during this time. Your services to the humanity. You are, the true warriors against this war, against the COVID. You are the great heroes. So thank you again. I would also like to thank the audience for all of you who have joined here on the Zoom and also watching on the Facebook and YouTube. We hope this session was useful and resourceful, and thank you for bringing all the questions. You just bring different flavors to and bring up all the concerns that may be out there. I would also like to announce that IIGB, as many of you know, IIGB and many of the community organizations are organizing a vaccine camp on May 1st and May 2nd, which is next weekend. If this is helpful, please go and register at iigb.org. I'm sure if you have had any concerns, those are probably alleviated by all this panel discussions, and it will just help you get vaccinated. So please get vaccinated, protect yourself, and do your part to get this humanity and the community going. So thank you again.
I would like to also add to this is that, we'll probably have one more session 6 months from now as we will get more and more data and have these our wonderful doctors back to discuss, what's going on, especially when the fall and winter comes along. It'll probably, we'll have much more data, whether booster shots, all those things will be a little bit more clearer. So we'll have one more. I really, from the bottom of my heart, it's not just this session, the doctors spent time over the last week discussing the different questions that would come up. And, we met on Friday. I really thank, all of you taking the time out of your busy schedules already as doctors to, do this, all this outside of your regular day-to-day work. So thank you very much from the bottom of my heart, all of you doctors.
So thank you for everyone who joined, and thank you to IIGB. And because of us, if 2 more people got a vaccine, our time will be well spent. So thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.